Welcome, Soul Family, to another episode of Awaken with Carla, the podcast that empowers you to awaken your mind, nurture your body, heal your heart, and nourish your soul. I am your host, Carla, and I'm so thrilled to have you here with me today. In each episode, we dive into a variety of different topics from health, wellness, spirituality, mindset, manifestation, all with the intention of guiding you towards unlocking your greatest potential. Together, we'll embark on a transformational journey of self discovery where we'll gain practical tools, inspiring insights, and personal stories that will inspire you to create positive changes in your life. So, without further ado, let's get started with today's episode. And I'm delighted to introduce to you my guest speaker, Riza Miller. Riza is an editor, author, herbalist, and a seer. Her journey of becoming one of the most unique diviners working today began in childhood. Finding and interpreting symbols in art fascinated her, and Riz's curiosity developed not only into a natural gift of discernment, but a warm, genuine mission to use her talents for others. Ultimately, she wants her seers to embrace more fulfillment. Riza aims to open a dialogue, intend on healing stuck energies, not by telling people what to do, but helping them to see the answers within her guidance as they relate to their own lives. So, in this episode, we're going to be exploring how to balance the light and the dark. And we're going to learn about this art concept and how we can apply this into our life. Riza Miller shares her unique perspective, her own personal story, as well as some powerful tools that can help to transform our life in profound ways. Now, whether you're seeking guidance on physical health, emotional healing, spiritual awakening, or just simply aligning your mindset for success, you're in the right place. Our intention is to provide you with the tools and inspiration you need to create a life filled with much more abundance, purpose, and fulfillment. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. And remember that the power to transform lies within you. Quickly, before we jump into this episode, I just wanted to remind you that if you're enjoying this content, to please make sure that you like, subscribe, and download and even share this with your family and friends. So get ready to ignite your curiosity, expand your consciousness, and awaken the extraordinary that lies within you. Let's dive into today's episode of Awaken with Carla. Well, thank you so much, Riza, for being here today. I'm so excited to be having this chat with you and to be learning a little bit more about who you are. So, actually, if you don't mind just starting off with that and telling us a little bit about yourself
Mhm.
and what you do.
Thank you so much first for having me, Carla. It's great to be here. And who I am an editor, a writer, a historian, and I also do um, seer type work with tea leaf reading and smoke.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that? What does that look like?
So when I'm reading tea leaves, it looks it's very much like what you might think. My seeker will drink a cup of tea. It has to be loose tea, and then we turn the cup upside down and look
Mhm.
at the shapes and patterns in it. And in smoke, it is I do it two ways. You can actually read smoke as it rises. Or sometimes I use a candle to capture soot into a drawing, and then I read the shapes that appear on the page from the soot drawing. So art is kind of always an element in what I'm doing. I feel like art and life are kind of a hand in hand thing. Even if people say they're not creative, I would beg to differ. I feel as though creativity and art are part of everyone. So.
Mhm. I love how you said that. And actually, that's something that I've been learning about myself over the last few years because I did grow up telling myself or convincing myself that I'm not creative because I don't
Mhm.
necessarily create art in the same form as like a an artistic artist would or a musician would. But you are right. The more I'm sort of learning about myself and sort of this journey called life, the more I'm learning that, the creation and art form can come in many different ways.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for our conversation today that art is literally around us all the time and we're constantly taking it in, even if we're not thinking about it. I mean, when I was putting my makeup on today, I was thinking about our topic and I was thinking that I'm using that same principle to contour my face for this big ring light. I was literally adding shadows
Mhm.
back into my face so I don't look flat or overlit, too much
Right,
light,
right.
because that's not a natural way to look. So every time you do your makeup, every time you pick out an outfit, every time you are looking at the logo that somebody drew for a restaurant or a company, you are taking in and or participating in art.
I love how you said that. I mean, we don't always think about it that way, but you're right. We can look around us and see art in so many different forms and
Mhm.
so many different ways. Even nature itself
Oh,
is a
yeah.
form of art. And the animals and the flowers and everything that is encompassed in nature is a form of art. So I love that. Yeah. I wanted to pick your brain about there was this concept that you sort of were alluding to just now
Mhm,
in our conversation, but that you and I chatted about earlier, and it's I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but chiaroscuro.
mhm.
And I wanted to just learn a little bit more about what that is and how that can sort of help us navigate our human experience.
I would love to talk about that, Carla. So I think that one of the um, challenges facing the spiritual community right now is the overuse of constant light and positivity. And as someone who's having a human experience, it's very difficult to embrace light constantly. We stub our toe, we drop our teacup, and all these little frustrations in life, as well as big frustrations, happen as just part of being alive. It's part of the human experience. And when you are constantly, I almost want to say, scolding yourself for feeling the shadows in in your life experience. It's not a normal way to be. So when you were talking about nature just now, nature has day and night. It is part of our normal cycle. When you look through a beautiful forest, you are just as struck by the shadows as you are by what's lit. And many years ago, when I was both getting my degree in photography and my art history degree, I was introduced to a concept called chiaroscuro. I'm not Italian, but I love saying it with that accent because it sounds like that's how it should be said. So chiaroscuro came about as a reaction against the Renaissance painters. In the Renaissance time, a lot of the paintings and artwork were illuminated. Basically, there were almost no shadows. Things looked flat, almost two-dimensional. There's
Okay.
something to say about the skill of the artists. They were incredible, but it was the style. And then artists came along like Rembrandt and Caravaggio, and they added shadow into paintings. And suddenly the world looked a lot more real because, you can have a glow, but not like they used to have in those Renaissance paintings. I mean, they actually used gold leaf to make them glow. And that's just not real life. So when they added the shadow back in, the paintings became three-dimensional. The shadow and light work together, which is basically the meaning of chiaroscuro. It means that you need both light and shadow to create a work of art, and you need both light and shadow to create your life as well. When I was studying photography, I remember very distinctly one of my professors saying to me, "The shadow defines the light. They must both be present and they must work together. This is what creates a successful photograph. Now, I'm old enough that I learned on black and white film, so it's very easy to see light and shadow on black and white film.
Yeah.
It's still fantastic to look at old black and white pictures. It's very easy to understand this concept when you do. So, from that point, I remember sitting in the class and listening to that phrase over and over: shadow defines the light. You need both to be in balance. And I went home and wrote it on a page and stuck it on my wall because
Mhm.
I felt like that professor wasn't just giving me artistic advice. I felt like this was a moment that was life defining,
Mm.
that really gave me permission to feel all my feelings and be who I was for the first time. And um, it was definitely a pivot where I was suddenly okay with shadow, both in my work and in myself.
Mhm. And so just for the purpose of, the listeners, can
Mhm.
you give us an idea of what that shadow looks like in our life? Mhm.
I think it's individual for everyone.
Mhm.
So for me growing up, I was always a kid that I I liked scary movies. I liked wearing black. I was probably a repressed goth girl, to be honest. But I grew up in a small town and in a conservative area, and it wasn't okay to be different.
Huh.
It wasn't okay not to be like other people. So I wasn't. But I knew I wasn't authentic. I knew I didn't feel comfortable in my skin, and I really wanted to express myself in ways that weren't okay, and I took that as I'm not okay, that I'm not okay as myself. And so I kept fighting against these pieces of myself that were shadow embracing, that liked scary stories, that were okay with the idea that girls can be mad. And it's I grew up in a time where, in a place I should say, where it was not feminine to express anger, that you had to kind of be agreeable or find a different way to express your feelings. And we all understand now that's just not a healthy way to be. It's
Mhm.
not the way to do it. But 40 years ago, that wasn't true.
Right.
And it became a system of repression for me that was mostly self-imposed from the information I took in from society. I built my own cage, and that cage was my shadow. It was incredibly freeing to understand that I built it and I could take it down, and that it was okay to take it down, and that in the act of doing that and in becoming myself, yes, some things in my life would fall away, but things that were more aligned to me would show up and they would stay. And I feel like that day when I truly understood the concept that you need both light and shadow and they have to play together nicely and find a good balance for you. When I understood that, it was liberating.
So how do you get them to play together nicely?
You have
Especially
to get
when
Yeah, you have to get to know them. That's it's something that we've been taught not to do in many parts of culture. We've been taught not to embrace our darker feelings. We've been taught not to embrace things that are shadowy in any way. To turn around and look at what scares you is something we've been taught not to do. And it has been my experience that when I do, 90% of the time, it's not nearly as scary as I think it's going to be. I used to be scared of things that I think are silly now, like putting my hair up like this. I used to say, I can't do it. I can't put my hair up in a bun by myself. And I realized one day watching a YouTube video, like, it doesn't look that hard. And I don't know why I was scared of it for all those years. And now I think all I had to do was stop and turn around and face that fear. And it's suddenly not so scary. And
Mhm.
I know that it's a small step, but every step is an accumulation of courage. And whatever the small fear is, say it is in fact fine art. So I would encourage anyone, whether they think they're creative or not, if what scares you is watercolors, take a class, even an online class. You don't even have to pay for an in-person class because there's so many great things online now that are free or cheap. If you are
Mm,
scared of it, try it, face it, and realize that most of the time it's going to be just fine. And you're going to feel that much more empowered and that much braver going forward
mm,
because you just
mhm,
X'd off another thing you're afraid of. You've taken power away from something that was throwing a shadow over you. And
mhm,
there have been other examples like that in my life. I picked up running. I would tell you, I'm not an athlete. That's what I would have said. And even though I had been a professional dancer, does it get more athletic than that? But I would have still told you I'm not an athlete. So the act of running, I spent a lot of time saying, I can't do it. I can't do it. And then I thought, well, I'll try it. And I'll get to that tree down there. And then I'll get to the stop sign. And then I'll get to the next tree. And I found that I could do it. And I was totally fine doing it, and it was great, and I felt like afterwards, a lot of my stress and anxiety were gone, not just over running itself, but in general, because it
mhm,
was such a fantastic way to really get rid of stress and, just realign your body, and I was no longer afraid of something that every child does. But, growing
mhm.
up, I was told, "Oh, you're not athletic, you're creative." And as if those two things can't exist. And I'm here to say they can. They can
Mm,
absolutely exist. And you can be an upbeat person and still want to wear black. You can be anyone that you want to be or are. And I think one of the best ways is when you look into those shadow spaces in yourself, just pick at them one piece at a time. You don't have to tackle it all in one day. That's like for movies. I don't know if you've ever seen. There's like movies where like a woman will take a trip and read a book and suddenly she has a whole new life. It hasn't worked that
mm.
way for me. That would be
Right. It
lovely.
hasn't worked that way for me either.
Yeah, that would be lovely. I don't know anybody who's had that experience.
Right.
It's usually much more of a long process of self-examination and unlearning things that society or our loved ones or our
Mhm,
teachers who meant well, but just didn't
mhm,
know better, have taught us
mhm,
to believe and that we
mhm,
chose to accept. And
mhm.
so the process is deconstruction in the
Yes.
shadows, mostly. So I think that it's doable for anyone. There are things that you definitely need support with. When you're getting into, picking apart your traumas or your pain or grief, those are things you need support with. And, if you can seek a therapist or a counselor or a coach or even just a good friend, definitely recommend a journal. Those are things that maybe aren't as easy to pick apart by yourself. But if what you're afraid of is doing your own hair, you can do that.
Right.
Everyone can try that.
Right.
If it's something like, "Oh, I'm not good with my makeup," you are. Stop telling yourself you're not. Just give it a try.
Right.
So, that was a long answer to your question.
No, but I appreciate the answer because I think it's important for people to really understand the power of our mind and the stories that we tell ourselves or that
Yeah,
we've allowed others to convince ourselves of, right? Because at the end of the day, we make choices about absolutely everything in our life. And that's empowering in itself because we can then choose to do things differently. Now that we recognize that we, essentially create every aspect of our physical reality. So I really like how you really sum that up, and it's something that I teach my clients as well is that it's really important to take a step back and just sort of understand that we're all a product of sort of the conditioning that's happened in society, and as you said, whether it's our family, friends, teachers, society at large, there's a good intention behind what everyone is essentially doing, but in doing that, so often we allow others to sort of tell us who we are
Yeah.
rather than go through that journey of discovering who we truly are. And I believe, and part of my journey has been to to really fully understand who I am. I've had to do all of that shadow work. I've had to go through sort of what I call my period of darkness
Mhm.
before I can truly recognize, what the light looks like and who I am in that light. And so, um, I couldn't agree more with the fact that we need to have both in order to have sort of perfect balance or harmony. We
Mhm.
find it in nature, as you mentioned earlier. Um, we find it in art. It adds more depth, as you said, in an art form. But it's certainly, part of our day-to-day life that we have to balance those aspects of ourselves, the light and the dark, in order for us to really be complete.
Like I said, when I was doing my makeup, I was thinking about this and I looked at this palette that I have. And
Mhm,
it has 3 tones in it. And the one I use the most is the light one because I'm most comfortable with that. And I think if
mhm,
to myself, if I mess up with that, it doesn't matter. It's easy to wipe off. Now, the dark one is way more important because it's what creates the shadows on my face
mhm,
that otherwise wouldn't be
mhm,
there. And yet, as many times as I've done my makeup, I hesitate every time I hold the brush over that dark tone, and then I think, "Well, maybe I'll use blush instead of this contouring palette." And I have to pull back and say, "No, this is an artificial light source, and I know that if I want to look normal and
mhm,
three-dimensional, I have to
mhm.
add a shadow back in." And I thought it was really an interesting parallel that it's easy to be uncomfortable looking at the darker aspects of the shadow aspects. And it's easy to feel that fear start to rise up. For me, I feel it in my gut. I feel it literally start to rise up into my chest, and I have to stop and take a breath and remind myself, in this case, it's just my makeup. I can wipe it off and start over. This is not a big deal. It's
Right.
okay to try a second time if I don't like how it looks. But, it's I think it's that way in life too. There's this expectation that we have to get it right and we have to do it perfectly. And I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm not sure who decided it was that way or who created that level of expectation. And I
Mm,
feel like a lot of people put that weight on themselves that I can't make a mistake or I can't fall back into this. And yes, sometimes those habits are destructive. Um, but it's also okay to try and fail and then try again. And
right.
I wish that more people would find their peace with that for themselves
Mhm,
and
mhm.
for their loved ones as well. It's okay as long if you tried and you didn't quite finish your face quite right, it's okay to wash your face and start over.
Right,
And,
right.
it's okay to you wanted to go for a run, but you ended up taking a nice long walk. That's still a win because you gave it a try
Absolutely,
and you got out there and you did something. And I feel like
absolutely.
those wins all need to be embraced every time you're facing something that is a shadow aspect for you, large or small. Doesn't matter.
Mhm,
Every single time it's a win that you've tried. And I always like to try and encourage folks, especially when, they come to me for a reading and shadowy stuff always comes up because that's real life. And I would
yes.
love to say that every time I deliver a reading to someone, it's all good news, but that's not real life. Um, Instead, it's kind of like, so, I see that you're challenged by this from the past, or that, sometimes your temper gets the best of you.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
then it's like, how can you work with that in a way that's effective for you? So
Right.
I like I said, every try is a win, and celebrating those small wins is really critical part of the process.
Mhm, mhm. And I always love to say, like, and this is something that for me was, helped me really shift the way sort of I look at my life. was that there is no such thing as failures, that
Mm.
it's only feedback, and everything that we attempt and we experience or we try in our life, it's only an opportunity for us to gain something from that experience, a lesson to be learned, or some form of feedback that we need to get in order to go back, integrate those lessons, integrate, what we've learned from it, and then do it again and do it, you know, better the next time, or keep perfecting it and keep working on it until it becomes that sort of masterpiece of perfection.
Yeah, and I think perfection is one of those, concepts that has to be fluid
Hmm.
because, as the
Exactly.
world changes, everything changes with it. And,
Hmm.
change is a constant for all of us. And yet I think as a collective, humans don't always love change. And yet
Yeah.
I feel like especially right now with the way technology is changing and the way things are going, if we balk and resist change, it will
Hmm.
make it that much harder because it's going to happen anyway.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. And, I think at the end of the day, at this point, there's no real stopping it. We've gotten to a point where it's evolved so quickly, and it's transformed our lives in so many different ways. That's made things so convenient for us that it would make it
Yes.
very difficult also for us to now go back to a time where we did not use or rely heavily on technology to make
Mhm.
our life more convenient. But we are sort of at that crossroad where it will become, I think, an issue long term.
Mhm.
Um, where I just have some concerns around where the direction of technology is going, but that's for a completely different conversation. Um, but yes, I think that we do need to embrace change. We need to embrace, um, just our own sort of evolution and how we change, because at the end of the day we are not the same individuals that we were when we were younger, or we're not the same individual that we were even just simply yesterday, just because it is a
Mhm.
completely different day. And we can make a choice to look at our life with a different perspective, with a different lens, and completely start to change the reality that we face and we live.
I thought of something the same professor told me right when you were talking. He used to always say to us about our photography projects, keep looking. And what he meant was, most people stand there and take a picture like this. Nowadays, it's with their phone. But
Mhm.
I learned with an old 35 millimeter film camera. And he would say, were you standing like this? Did you crouch down? Did you try standing on a chair and looking into it?
Right.
And he would say, keep looking for the new perspective, keep looking for a different way of seeing the same thing. And
Mhm.
again, it's one of those lessons that can apply to life as well. You know, you're not happy, keep looking. Keep
Mhm.
seeking the way to see a situation that you can find your way through it, or you can at least get around it if that's what you need to do. But if you don't keep looking and you quit, then absolutely nothing good is going to come of it. Um, and it's important to know that there's always more than one way to see a situation, no matter what our feelings are about it, no matter how
Mhm.
vehemently we disagree with someone. There's multiple ways to look at something. And I feel like especially in society lately that seems to feel a little bit like a lost concept. And I feel like the compassion that it takes to
Mhm.
look at things in different ways is something that the world could use a little bit more of right now. Um, I mean, I don't know how exactly to make that happen except to contribute it from my own point and where I'm standing. But I feel like if enough individuals came to a similar conclusion, it would actually begin to make a change and impact.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And it's so interesting that you're talking about that, because I was just having a conversation about how important it is to have compassion, not only with ourselves, but really with everyone around us because
Mhm.
we
Agree.
everyone is going through such challenging times, whether it's, what's happening in the world today or it's just, their own personal experience. We're complex beings that have so many layers and such
Mhm.
depth to who we are that at times we don't fully understand why we behave or think in certain ways, but it's coming from, those deeper areas of our subconscious mind that, cause us to behave or act in a certain way. And I think, we really need to start to be more compassionate with each other because so
Mhm.
many of us are carrying pain and trauma and just holding on to these sort of emotions from the experiences that they've had in their life that it unfortunately it impacts how we show up and how we behave today. And unless you know someone very intimately or very deeply, you may not necessarily know that someone has had these traumas or life challenges. And so it's really important for us to give each other that grace because we
Mhm.
each have our own personal struggles, but so do others in their own form and in their own way. And as you said, I think if we could all just start to take that perspective and start to show up in the world where we are giving each other more compassion, then I do think that we can make some profound changes.
I agree, and then nothing feels as personal. I
Exactly.
Yeah, it is actually an incredible amount of grace to offer ourselves as well to stop taking things personally. It's that
Hmm.
when we're sitting reflecting on our own past, our own shadows, our own fears, to understand that yes, everybody has that same backpack full of stuff.
Hmm.
There's different stuff in their backpacks than in our own, but
Hmm.
we're all carrying it, and to understand that what's in theirs has nothing to do with us. So it is
Right.
an
And you,
incredible relief to not take things personally.
it's very empowering, actually.
Mhm.
It really helps you to take your power back and not allow so much of the outside world to influence who
Mhm.
you are and how you feel and how you choose to show up in the world, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if we continue to do that, if we continue to allow that influence from the outside world, it eventually leads to, you know, having all kinds of emotions that are weighing us down. It leads to us not feeling confident enough to show up in the
Mhm.
world that in a way that we know is more in alignment with who we
Yeah.
are, but we don't have that confidence to be in our own power
Mhm.
and um, really embrace our individuality and show up the way that we feel is resonating with who we are.
Two things popped in my mind as I was listening to you. First is that we're only born with two hardwired fears: the fear of falling, which is legitimate, and the
Mm-hmm.
fear of loud sounds. And if you reflect for a moment on how most animals are, even as puppies, kittens, a
Mm-hmm.
baby horse, they will be afraid of falling and of loud sounds. And every other fear is taught to them, just like
Mm-hmm.
our fears are taught to us. And it is a difficult thing to accept that we've been taught to be afraid. And we have been taught to be afraid of who we are because of what other people might think of it. And then so many people that I have encountered will have so much admiration for someone who's like, "Oh, she's so cool and she's herself, or she has this unique style and she's lucky." And I'm like, "She
Right.
chose it, actually."
Right.
If you are someone who wants to have a unique style, you have to just do it. You can't be afraid of
Right.
clothing. You know, if you're
Mhm.
someone who wants to have a unique way of writing or putting your ideas into the world, you have to just do it and realize that
Mhm.
not everyone's going to agree, and that's okay. They don't have
Right.
to. You have to feel good
Mhm.
about it, and you have to find the courage to face your fear that you were taught to have. That's nothing to do with
Mhm.
falling or loud sounds,
Right.
and embrace your authentic voice as a stylist, as a writer, as an athlete, as whatever it is that is what you truly want to do in this world that you were probably brought into this world to do. And
Mhm.
so many people that I encounter, including myself, fall back into that fear, fall back into the um, concern about what others will think,
Right.
concern that it's not good enough, concern, oh, what will my neighbors say? What will my sister say? What will whoever say? It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
They have to go live their
Mhm.
life. And, there's a meme that passed around social media that said, what other people think of you is none of your business.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I actually printed it out and hung it on my desk because I needed that reminder as I was
Right.
moving through a process of embracing my selfness. I
Mhm.
needed that reminder.
Mhm. Yes, it's such an important reminder because I think that is exactly the biggest fear that most people face when it comes to, you know, um, stepping into their life the way they feel called to do so
Mhm,
is that fear of like, what is everyone going to think of me? What am I doing? Am I even smart enough for this or good enough for this or worthy enough for this? Or will anyone like what I have to say? And the reality is that you're right, you mentioned not everyone's going to resonate with what you're saying, but or with how you're showing up or with what you're producing, if it's a product or a service that you're putting out into the world, that those that do will find you.
mhm,
And that's the most important thing that I think people need to walk away with, is just knowing that we all have a message to
yeah,
share with the world, and that message will resonate with some people. It's not going to
right,
resonate with everyone, but those that it is meant to resonate with will find you and will find the message that is meant for them to hear. So I think that helps us to sort of, you know, calm that anxiety and calm that pressure that,
mhm,
we're not good enough or we're not going to be able to, come up with a message that is going to hit home with people. But the idea is that we all have something powerful to say, and powerful gifts to share with each other. We just have to overcome our own fears and overcome our own blocks that we impose on ourselves. And, I think it starts off with being taught by the external world. We are taught to have these fears, as you mentioned. We're taught to create these blocks, but then we make the choice to hold on to the blocks
mhm.
as we continue and progress through life, right? When we can easily make the choice to release those blocks, release those belief systems, and choose to overcome our fear and achieve whatever it is that we're looking to do in our life.
And circling back to the original subject of light and shadow, I
Hmm.
feel that, you know, when you can stop chasing the light long enough to embrace your shadow, that you suddenly realize there's not that much to be scared of, and
Hmm.
or everyone else is just as scared. So it's one of those moments where overcoming the fear is a true gift, and that it's okay sometimes to stand in your shadow, and it's okay to find courage in your shadow just as much as it is important to find your light power as well. Some people's
Right.
message is straight from their shadow. Some
Hmm.
people's gift is
Hmm.
straight from their shadow,
Hmm.
and I think that that's an okay thing. If your message has come through, I know an amazingly talented writer, and her gift one of her big gifts, I should say, from the world was a book about grief when her husband passed. And that is straight from her shadow.
Mhm,
Dealing with the grief, like a sudden loss of a young husband is nothing but shadow, really.
mhm,
And she has
mhm.
helped thousands of other people cope with loss because she was
Right.
willing to, after her own grief, sit in her shadow and write about it and share that
Mhm,
experience. It is the
mhm,
gift of the darkness that she experienced, the loss that went
mhm.
forward into the world and created more light.
Right, exactly. And I was just going to say that it was through that darkness that allowed her to create much more healing and light
Mhm.
for so many other people who had a similar experience to her,
Right,
right? And
right.
again, just tying it to the point just before that, where we were talking about how that message is not necessarily going to resonate with everyone, but
Right.
she found her soul tribe. She found her community of people that needed needed exactly what she was able to offer in terms of this beautiful gift that she gained through her own personal experience. And
Mhm.
that is something that we also need to understand is that every experience we have, whether it is positive or whether it's challenging, that there is a beautiful lesson or something to gain from that experience, that we can
Right.
turn that pain around or turn that darkness around into something that can bring more light into the world,
Mhm.
as you said. I
Absolutely.
love that.
And that it's okay to stand in that darkness if you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We need to go through um, sort of those ebbs and flows. We need
Mhm.
to, just like we started off the discussion talking about nature and how there is the light
Mhm.
and the dark. We experience that light and dark
Mhm.
every single day. And so
Yeah.
we need to embrace that, in our own lives. And just wanted to ask you another quick question about
Mhm.
what are some of the drawbacks or the limitations that sort of we can face when we do not embrace sort of that duality of
Mhm.
the light and or the shadow aspects of who we are?
Carla, I think it's giving away our power. We're giving away our autonomy. We're giving away our self. When you continue to feed a monster, it just gets bigger. And, you know, a lot of the I love a good scary movie, but I like to turn it off at the end and understand that that monster was somebody's creation. And when I'm looking into myself, I have monsters that I have fed and they were not real. And when I just decided to stop feeding them, they'd certainly they will resist that initially.
Mhm,
But then they kind of lose their power. So
mhm,
if you keep feeding your monsters and you keep feeding your shadows without turning and walking into them, at least temporarily, to understand yourself better, it just gets bigger and it holds more and more and more over you. And it literally holds you back from your ability to glow, from your ability to create. And I don't just mean as a fine artist, I mean in the world in general. Your ability to create happiness for yourself and others, your ability to create good health for your body, which is so fundamental. Your ability to even, grow houseplants happily because you'll just doubt. You're like, oh, I'm going to kill this plant. I've heard people literally unpack a plant and go, I'm going to kill it. Like, really? Like you just got it home. How do you know that? You know, like you don't
right.
have to start there. You can start, I'm going to try to keep this plant alive. Start there.
Exactly.
Begin
Exactly.
somewhere. And
Exactly.
y- I have an autoimmune disorder, and I remember telling a naturopath once that I can't look at my body and in my gut where it affects me. She said, "Can you look at your gut in the mirror and say I love you?" And I said, "I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I can say thank you." So it's kind of like wherever you are, start there. If you can't
Mm,
get to I love you, and when you look at your shadow, get to thank you and build from that point until you can appreciate that yes, sometimes these challenging things happen to your health, to your loved ones, to yourself, to your career, to your home. and it's not easy. We all go through it. It's part of the human experience. It's part of the experience on Earth, not just for humans, actually, for
Mhm,
everything that lives
mhm,
here. We all go
mhm,
through loss. We all go through grief. And the result is that you are given the opportunity to continue, just to continue. And what can you do with that? And can you build on it and make it better for yourself and those around you? Can you give
mhm.
yourself the grace to face the shadows, to look into them? And if you're not ready, it's okay. Like I said, is easy, start somewhere easy. Start with, I'm going to conquer learning how to blend my makeup, or I'm going to conquer walking 3 blocks and down and 3 blocks back in my neighborhood. If that's where you are, be where you are. You don't have to
Right,
sign up for a marathon and then set yourself up to fail.
right.
That's I see folks do that, and I always wonder, you know, it's good to have those big goals, and it's good to see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but the rainbow
Mm,
can be a long journey. So find a safe place to start, and like I said,
mhm.
keep accumulating those wins instead of not starting. Because if you don't start, it's something that will become a regret, and that will that just be one more thing in your backpack of shadows.
Right, right. The other thing is we can't really know where we're going unless we know
Right.
where we are, unless where
Yeah,
we know where we're starting, our starting point, right? So if we want to
exactly.
make change in our life and we envision a future that's different from how our life is in the present moment, then we have to, take that step and just
Mhm.
evaluate and assess where we're at so we know the steps that we need to take in order to
Right.
move forward. Um, how can we ensure that we don't get stuck in the shadow
Mm.
and don't get stuck in the dark side?
I think awareness is the key. I think that understanding where you are and what you're looking for helps a lot. I'm a big fan of journaling, but that's not for
Mhm,
everyone.
mhm.
Um, I like to sometimes flip back through my journal and see where I've come from. It's sort of a nice record, and I also I have a separate book that is kind of my venting journal, where when I have things I need to just blow off steam, or I just want to swear a lot, or I'm really angry, or I'm really sad. Those are the things that go into that. And, um, I I think that getting stuck is always an issue in
Right.
any situation, and it seems like something that's been chronically going on since 2020. A lot of
Mhm,
folks went through this life-changing event for our planet, for
mhm,
everyone, and just realized they didn't like where they were, but they don't know where they want to go.
mhm.
And I feel like that's happening all over, and people are still in it. The stuckness, and as far as like readings that I have done in the past few years, I would say 95% of people come to me speaking about stuckness, either in their career or their life purpose or their relationship or their home. Stuckness is a chronic thing right now across the board from where I'm sitting, from what has been shown to me. And my only advice is action. Um, Sometimes you don't even know which way you want to go, but you know which way you don't want to go.
Mm,
So
mhm.
don't keep moving in the direction you don't want to go. Even if you're
Mhm,
taking itty bitty tiny baby steps in another direction, try something.
mhm.
It doesn't have to be your end game. If you're thinking like I've always wanted to, try flower arranging, take a class, and then you're like, oh, I don't like it, it's really messy, and I cut my hand on the roses, then it's not for you, but you tried it. And it's
Right.
better to say you tried it than always think like, oh, I wanted to be a florist and I didn't do it.
Mhm.
you know
Also,
I Go ahead.
how can you know you like something if we haven't tried it, or don't like something if we haven't tried it?
I have another acquaintance, and she always thought she wanted to live at the beach. And she retired, she sold her home, and she moved to the beach. And she got there and she was miserable. She didn't like it at all. Um,
Oh.
she didn't like how it shuts down when it's off season and there was nowhere to
Mm,
go out to
mhm,
eat and there was nobody to talk to and she missed her friends and she missed her favorite Chinese restaurant and all the things that had been part of her life before. And in less
mhm.
than a year, she closed up shop and moved home. But,
Wow.
she had to do it.
Mhm,
She had to
mhm,
try it. And yeah,
mhm,
that's a big one. That's an expensive lesson, financially, but she did it. And I think that, there are smaller ways to try things out than investing in properties. I mean, if that's where you are, that's great too. But,
mhm,
just a small taste of something to realize, do I like it? It's just like trying a new food, right? You don't always know.
mhm.
I mean, you see so many people will just look at something and go, I don't like that. But how do you know?
Right, right,
How do you know you don't like beets? You've never had them just because they look
right,
different. Like they might
right.
actually be really good and exactly what your body needs.
Mhm, mhm. It's so true. It's so true. And so how can we use this concept to help us create more meaning in life?
I think creating awareness of the shadow and light in our everyday life is an incredibly changing practice. And that can be something as simple as looking around where you are right now and taking in the shadows and the light. And there's always a highlight, which is like the spot in a room or a photograph or anything that is true white. And there's always a deep black shadow somewhere. And then the whole range in between. And,
Mhm,
most of us would say, "Oh, I feel comfortable in the middle," but we exist on that whole spectrum. So as you begin to see it around you, it doesn't feel so unnatural to swing off of that middle neutral space. It feels more aligned with how the planet moves, with how nature moves, with literally the way the whole universe moves through dark and light. And it is almost a peaceful understanding to know that it's okay not to be here in the center all the time, that you
mhm,
can swing into the light and you can swing into the shadow, and it's just part of the natural cycle of life. And,
mhm,
getting stuck on either side isn't necessarily a good thing. But if you can create an awareness around you, if you can create an understanding in your life experience and just start with what you see, that is enough to begin. It is enough
mhm,
to start incorporating the lesson into your life, and then you'll start to see it everywhere. You'll see it when you watch a movie, you'll see it when you look at an advertisement, you'll see it when you look into the face of your cat. You will notice the highlights and shadows that create the world we see and the world we experience, and then you'll
mhm,
kind of understand your place in it more.
mm. I love that. I love that. And I think that's something that so many of us are seeking is just to understand our place in this
Mhm.
grand universe that
Mhm.
we live in, and just finding that meaning and that purpose in our existence. And as you said, having perspective where we sort of balance out the light and the dark can help us in starting to find what that meaning is for each and every one of us.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Very healing, a very healing
Yes.
practice.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate, having this conversation with you. I feel like I learned a lot, and I really hope that the listeners also gain something from our discussion. If people wanted to find you and learn a little bit more about you, where would we be able to find you?
My website is teandsmoke.com, which is pretty easy to remember. I'm also on Instagram under the name Tea and Smoke by Rissa, and I'm always available at those two places.
Love that. And I'll make sure to link the website and your Instagram account in the notes below. And just one final question. I know you've shared so many valuable insights already with us today, so thank you again.
Mhm.
But just one final question for you. Do you have any final thoughts or any tips that you can share with our listeners on how they can bring about more balance, more harmony into whether it's their mental, their emotional,
Mhm.
their physical, or their spiritual well-being?
I think that you have to start by recognizing where you are.
Mm,
I think you said something similar a few minutes ago. You have to understand your present situation.
mhm,
And I, for me, that's always in journaling, because I'm able to step away from my brain and empty it onto a page. And that doesn't work for everyone, but there will be something that works for you. I know a woman who finds a lot of peace and mental clarity when she crochets. You know,
mm,
um,
mhm,
some people find it gardening by putting their hands in the earth. You have to
mhm,
find that way, and there's always a way to get out of your head long enough to see yourself clearly where you are, and then you can decide where you want to go. And really, the options are endless. The only boundaries are the ones we create.
mm,
And I was thinking about that concept the other day, Carla. I remember when I was in high school, all of the track runners were very tall, but our star track runner in the entire county was a guy who was only 5'4", and it didn't
mm,
bother him that he was smaller than the other runners. He was
right.
faster, he trained harder,
Mhm.
and he went on to get a scholarship for track. And
Wow.
it didn't occur to him that he wasn't as tall and he'd have to work harder to make up the pace of somebody with
Right,
a wider leg span. He was just
right,
simply going to do so, and he did it.
right.
And I was thinking about him and about how, everybody else said, "You're not tall enough to do this. This is a limitation for you." And he was just kind of like, "Meh,
Right.
that's not gonna be a limitation for me." And then it wasn't. It just simply wasn't.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
I started thinking about, like, how can I incorporate that into my own fears? How can I say, like, well, just because it's been a limitation for someone else doesn't mean it has to be for me. And I think, again, the steps you take to find that are just one at a time. Clear your mind, create the awareness, and then action. Small
mhm,
actions, move forward. And it's okay to pivot and go a different direction. And
mhm.
you have to decide not to judge yourself for changing your path. It's okay to
Right,
change paths. People do it all the time. I mean, look
right,
how often, movie stars reinvent their look or their whole everything. That's just part of life, finding a new
right,
direction. And it's
right.
it's totally a good thing to do because,
Mhm,
sometimes our brain needs something new.
mhm, mhm. And it keeps us sort of young and tapping into that creative side of ourselves that allows
Mhm.
us to really create what we want at any point
Yes.
we want, right? Because we can just simply like when we go through the process of healing and
Mhm.
we finally get to that place where we can come into alignment with who we are, it becomes so much easier for us to then create a life that we seek without
Yes.
all of the resistance that we typically face when we're trying to achieve some of our goals or objectives when we're still dealing with some of these blockages that hold us back.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the decision that you're no longer going to honor a limitation, that you're
Mhm.
going to let it go is a big one, and it's a daily practice. I admire the high school student I knew, but I don't know that it's that easy for everyone.
Right.
And I know that for him, it was still a process. He did
Mhm.
have to train harder. He did have to find other ways to make up for what was truly a difference in physical body type. And he decided it wasn't going to be a limitation. He was going to work his way around it. And I think
Mhm.
it's true like that for all of us. You see these amazing stories about people who overcome all kinds
Mhm.
of limitations and traumas to go on and achieve their own personal greatness. And
Mhm.
instead of saying, "Oh, they were lucky," or "Oh, things just got they're just different for them. It's not like that for me." Well, yeah, it is different for you 100% because you're living
Mhm,
your own story, and
mhm.
B, you create your luck. You
Right.
create it. You've gotta move forward saying, "I'm creating better luck, and I'm going to achieve, whatever it is." And the steps in between start to fall into place. They start to become your vision.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't agree more with that, and I love that that's sort of how we're wrapping up this episode because um, it comes full circle, right? And it's also empowering for people to know that we ultimately create our reality, and we ultimately have the choice at any given point to change that reality. So if we're not comfortable or we're not happy with how our life is currently, then we can choose to create something different.
Agree, absolutely. And then the steps start to become um, apparent as you go forward.
Yes, one step at a time,
Yes.
small steps, every little small step will eventually compound into something magnificent. When you look back, whether it's a year later or 5 years later, you will
Mhm.
be amazed at what little small steps can do in the long run.
Yes, I agree completely, and I've personally experienced that as well.
Yes. Oh, me too. Me too. Well, thank you again, Riza. I really appreciate you being here today and you sharing your time and your energy with me and all these amazing insights and really helping me to understand sort of that duality and how we can apply that, art concept into our day-to-day life. So thank you again. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you so much for having me, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this transformative episode of Awaken with Carla. I hope, again, like usual, that you found something in this episode that can help you and that you can take away and apply into your own life. As we come to an end, as you know, I like to share some of the things that I learned from this conversation. The first thing is this new term, Chiaroscuro, which is an art term that means that we need to use both the light and the dark in order to create the masterpiece that's in front of us. And I guess, through my conversation with Reza, what I guess I've learned is that we need to do the same when it comes to our life. We need to embrace both the light and the darkness, or both the aspects of ourselves that we love about ourselves, but also those elements and those darker sides or those shadow sides of ourselves that we might struggle with. And we have to find a way to bring those two worlds together so that we can come back into wholeness and feeling complete, being back to feeling complete. The second thing is that we are taught not to look at our shadows and really to just focus on the positive things that are happening and not to pay attention to anything negative that's going on. However, as we mentioned in this conversation and in the point above or earlier, is that we really do need to embrace both aspects, the shadow and the light, in order to bring ourselves back to wholeness. Thirdly, the important thing when we're on this journey and we're healing ourselves and making these changes in our life is that understanding that every step forward that we're doing towards understanding our shadow self is also helping us to actually get one step closer to manifesting our dreams. And all of that is just an accumulation of courage. And so we need to remember that those steps, those little steps, even though we might feel like they're small and insignificant, those steps that we take towards doing the work or building our dreams is actually creating much more confidence and courage within us that we can use that and motivation to continue to taking steps forward. And then once we sort of allow those little steps to accumulate, and we look back over the course of, a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be, we can actually notice how much of an impact each of those little steps created along the way. And lastly, one thing that I just want to leave you with is something that Riza mentioned. Just like in photography, in life, if we're not happy with what we're seeing on our screen, or with what we're sort of being shown or presented with in our life, then we have to keep looking and keep seeking and finding a new perspective until we find the perspective that is much more in alignment with who we are and where we're going in our life. So if we encounter a situation and, naturally we'll have our own perspective, I encourage you to continue to find different ways to looking at the same situation so that you can grow and evolve, find the lessons, and apply those lessons so you can move forward. Again, I hope you enjoy this conversation. I know that I certainly learned a little bit about art, and certainly how it can apply to our day-to-day life. And again, I hope that you found something that you can take, a practical tool or tip that you can apply into your day life. And just a reminder, an important reminder, that healing, self-discovery, spirituality, this is a lifelong pursuit. And I continue to encourage you to find ways to continue exploring, to learn, to grow, and do that in your own unique way. Now, if you have any questions, or you would like to share any thoughts or tips or share your experience, then I absolutely would love to hear from you. So make sure to reach out to me, either send me an email, go on my website, or you can find me on all the social media platforms. And then final reminder that you're not alone on this journey. There are people out there that are willing and able to support you along the way. And just before we wrap up, I wanted to thank Riza for being on the show and sharing all her wisdom, her insights, her expertise. I certainly learned a lot from her. And lastly, I wanted to take a moment to thank you, the listeners, for helping me to build this beautiful community. And just remember that we're growing this together. We're creating a space where we're growing, we're connecting, and we're transforming. So another reminder, if you liked this episode, please share it with your family and friends. Make sure you like and you hit that subscribe button. That way you can stay notified anytime there's a new episode. And just remember that all of the support does mean a lot to me, and it continues to help me on my mission as I get out into the world and help to empower and help other individuals to recognize their own greatness. Remember that the power to awaken and live your best life lies within you. You have everything you need to manifest your dreams and create the life filled with purpose and fulfillment. Until next time, keep embracing your journey of self-discovery, nourishing your well-being, and awakening the extraordinary that lies within you. Stay tuned for more empowering episodes of Awaken with Carla. May you find peace, love, and light on your path.